From Glitch HQ on Riverside Avenue in
It's a Business.
Minneapolis, this is Nice Games Club, the show where nice game devs talk gaming and game development.
I'm Martha McGarry, and I make nice games.
I'm Stephen McGregor, and I make nice games.
And I'm Arthur Croy. I too make nice games.
In this episode, we talk with Matt Gravelle, owner of independent game development studio Gravelle, to talk about the ups and downs of running a business in the games industry. And so, if everyone is ready,
let's start.
Hello.
Thanks for coming all the way from your desk across the room into the clubhouse.
It was a rough trip, but I made it.
So, as Stephen said in the intro, you are the owner of Gravelle. You've been making games for a long, long time, and most recently here at Glitch. And you're here to tell us really about how that happened, right?
Yeah, I figure it might be interesting for people to hear, just kind of starting at the beginning and kind of a brief rundown of what it's been like running a studio. And there's been lots of ups and probably more downs, and maybe I can deliver some of my experience to help other people not make the same mistakes.
Yeah. And we've done a lot of topics on the show about starting a business, what it takes, the little pieces of it. But you have a lot of experience that speaks better to it than, say, our research does.
Yeah.
So the first thing is how did you get started?
Well, it started as a hobby. I mean, if we really want to dig back in grade school.
Oh, we do.
Ooh, wow.
If anybody's familiar with HyperCard, that was kind of my start point.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I think I had ambitions to make a Myst-like clone with a couple of friends that never even got anywhere, like maybe a sketch. That's about it. But then in middle school, a good friend and I, who we eventually formed Gravelle, but we were just doing it as a hobby, and we started making a game called Overwhelmed. It was overwhelming. And I don't know why we reached that name, but it was a space shooter, like an arcade shoot 'em up. And it was very ambitious, and it was a project that I'm quite proud of. It never saw the light of day as an officially released game, but it was pretty damn awesome.
I think everybody has that like first big idea that they put, that's more greater scope than they really should have. And it's like, it's a rite of passage, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, it's that piece of advice you always hear, but you never really absorb it until you do it yourself.
Yeah.
How long was that game in development for? Overwhelmed.
Well, like 6 years.
Well, okay, we're catching
starting
up to
in
you.
middle school.
We're catching up to you, vengeance.
Through high school.
Okay.
And then in college we had great intentions, and then it was built for Mac OS 9. And if you're familiar, it was a large transition from OS 9 to OS 10. And basically our entire code base had to be rewritten
Oh, no.
to be compatible with OS 10. And so that was just a really fast way to put it in the graveyard.
Yeah. That makes sense.
It was okay. I'll give you a little more of the scope because it was quite ambitious. The division. So I started as an artist, and I'm air quoting here. You can't see it, obviously. I was able to build like mechanical, like 3D art, like human made things. I'm okay at modeling, and I'm good with like graphic design and kind of layout and stuff like that. But I've always had trouble with like a lot of art beyond that.
Okay.
So this game worked really well for me because I was able to model some like cool ships and stuff in space that I'm still proud of, using Raydream Studio and Strata 3D, which are two really old programs that I'm guessing not many people know, but they were really, really rough to work with. They're like super buggy.
Oh.
It was a nightmare. But I was able to do pre-rendered ships that rotated at kind of like a 3/4 view. My partner was actually writing like a scripting engine, so you could make like missions, and it was just like
That's so cool.
You're supposed to like start as like a baseline ship and then work your way up and modify your ship. And we had really cool things like drone technology before drones were the thing that everybody's talking about. It's like drone weapons that like swarmed other ships, and it's just a ton of feature creep and no real like strong direction of how we were going to end this development.
Yeah. Well, you were in middle school, so
and high school and college.
Fair enough.
At some point, I mean, it's dragging on forever.
Mm-hmm.
At what point do you decide, like, hey, we should make a business out of this?
Well, that was kind of a slow burn. At the time, there was this group online called UDev Games, and at the time, like there really wasn't a huge community making games out there.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot more difficult.
And this was like what, 2001?
This was like between 2001 and like 2005. I
Okay.
think. So my business partner, he entered a competition with a game called Bug Thug.
Mm-hmm.
And it was mostly him. I had very little to do with it. I kind of helped polish it up a little bit, but it was just a really simple clicking game, just like how fast can you click the mouse, essentially.
Okay.
But it was really nice and polished, and he ended up winning some awards with it.
Mm-hmm.
The prize that he ended up winning was a copy of Unity.
Okay.
And this was Unity before it was officially released to the public. Like this is a closed beta.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's so
And
cool.
it was actually the first place prize, but the first place person decided, I'm not going to screw around with an engine. That's dumb sounding. So passed it off to us, or I should say him, who was second place. And then I remember having this discussion in the porch of my college house. I was on the phone with him. And we're like, we could try out this engine, this Unity thing. And, if it fails, whatever, no big deal. But I don't know. We just lost a game because OS 10 doesn't support it. So this might just make a lot of things easier.
Right.
So we decided to go with it. So that was like our first step towards doing it professionally.
Okay.
Still a ways off.
Yeah.
And then the next step was Unity was putting on a competition.
Oh.
I mean, they do one every year now. This was like the first iteration of that.
Okay.
And we ended up resurrecting Overwhelmed. And I learned Blender and I remodeled the ships to work in real time. He learned the code, how to code in Unity. And we ended up just making learning from our mistakes and making a very concise version of Overwhelmed.
Ah.
And it actually worked. We actually released something.
Ooh.
It had like some goals in the game. And it looked pretty good just for like learning Unity and learning Blender and all that stuff. So I'm pretty proud of that one.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up winning some awards. I forget. I think it might have been technical. It doesn't matter. We won some awards. It wasn't like the top winner, but we got some recognition with that.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped get our foot in the door.
Okay.
So now to answer your question directly, the first game that we did professionally was a title called Big Bang Brain Games. And a publisher named Freeverse approached us to make it. And they knew of us through Unity because they were like, hey, look at these guys. They made Overwhelmed. You should talk to them. So that was kind of our foot in the door. And this was near the end of college. So 2005-ish, I think, is when that happened. And it was a pretty easy decision to make. It's like, yeah, we're doing it. And in hindsight, the pay that they offered us to develop this for was like total chump change. It was like, if we were to gather our hours and like work it out hourly, we were totally working under minimum wage.
Oh, wow.
But it was a foot in the door.
Sure,
and it
yeah.
was quite exciting. And, we kind of had like little side gigs in college. And so it worked. It wasn't, I didn't feel like we were taken advantage of, even though we may have been. It's all good.
Yeah.
We actually developed and still have a good relationship with the people that we worked with Freeverse on that.
So it sounds like even if you didn't get paid a lot, there was a lot of experience.
There's a lot
and
of-
a relationship was built from that. So that's good.
And some of our biggest successes involved Freeverse. So
Okay.
it was a good start point.
Yeah, that's great.
And it was really exciting. I gotta brag a little bit. We were the first retail box product made with Unity, and it was on the shelves of some select Apple stores, although I never saw it. It was in Micro Centers, and I'm sure it ended up in some bargain bins and Fry's Electronics.
Right.
That's so awesome.
That's so interesting because like that is also the period of time right before boxed software was going to go away.
Yep. It's when it was something to be really excited about.
It might also be one of the last box products made with Unity, right?
Yeah, it's probably true.
That's amazing. Little piece of history.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still have any of the boxed copies?
Yes.
That's
They're
awesome.
collecting dust somewhere in the bottom of a drawer. But I take them out and I look at the foil shiny cover and I'm like, I remember those days.
Yeah. So at this point, you now have a title that got you on the map. You've got a commercial product. You've got a relationship with a publisher. How do you sustain a business once you sort of are in it? Once you've got something on, behind you now.
Yeah, that's a trick, isn't it? So I mean, this game didn't really provide enough revenue to like live off of in any sort of meaningful way. We were still kind of in this blurry area where I was finishing up college. I actually did a stint of student teaching in New Zealand because I went to school for math and physics education. I knew that game development was a possibility, but I never really took it too seriously as an option.
Yeah.
But when that was done, we kind of had a discussion like, well, all right, we have this foot in the door. It would be kind of a shame to waste it. And so we just decided, well, let's give it a go. He had a spare bedroom that we set up our office in. And I don't remember the exact timeline, but we got a couple gigs here and there just to kind of keep the lights on. I think I did some art for Hoyle 2007 or something like that.
Okay.
And it was just like me reskinning some card games.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about poker and actually found it interesting to watch competitive poker on TV.
Mm-hmm.
Total sidetrack, sorry.
No, it's really cool because they have like the camera underneath the table so you can see like what is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
Oh,
And,
yeah, I watch that too sometimes.
Players have different personalities and sunglasses and stuff.
Take it very seriously.
Yes. Almost comically so.
It is always these little side things that go along in your career that you kind of remember. Like, like if you took that little puzzle out, things would really be different, even though it feels like an aside, right?
Yeah, that's a good point because, I mean, this little gig that I was doing for Hoyle, it was actually through Freeverse. Really paid the bills for like a good few months. And that gave us the opportunity to then work on our next project, which was RC Laser Warrior.
Ooh.
And this is one of my favorite games that I've made. It is a RC racing game set in the future, maybe a dystopian future, and you're racing RC cars in a warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
And this was also tied to a competition that Unity put on. It's called the Unity Top Dog Competition. I think this was the next iteration of Unity competitions before they started the one that you see nowadays, which is like the Unity Awards, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up winning a few awards for this too. I don't remember the specific which ones. Gained us a little more recognition, and we got noticed by a publisher called Shockwave.
Mm-hmm.
And this was an online portal that did web games.
Yeah.
And so this is the period of time, this is 2007, 2008, where web games were more of a thing. This was really before mobile made any sort of visible presence.
Yeah.
And this was also the time when Unity had their web player, which was actually a pretty big thing at the time. It was kind of competing with Flash in a lot of ways, but allowed you to do like 3D in ways that Flash wasn't able to, or a lot of people didn't use Flash for at least.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing RC Laser Warrior as a web game through Shockwave, not only was it a nice stream of revenue, just ad-based revenue, but it also gave us some street cred. So then we got approached by Disney and Warner Brothers within the next year or so to work on web games for them.
Oh, yeah.
That's so cool.
And so we can also claim that we've released some of the first big name titles. Well, I guess big name for a web game titles for the Unity web player, and played at least a small part in popularizing the web player, which helped popularize Unity.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's not a part of Unity history I think people are really aware of.
Mm-hmm.
So you're making web games, and is that what you sort of thought you would be doing? Like, is that you're like, okay, now we've got a business. Now we got a regular commissions, regular income. Is that was the start of that for you guys?
Yeah. So I think the mixture of success with RC Laser Warrior combined with paychecks coming in from the bigger studios, that kind of established our model of trying to do about 50-50 independent game versus and work for hire.
Yeah. How do you make that decision of like, what are we working on today?
Yeah. Okay. So I think in our minds, we really wanted to do the 50-50 thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think that's what we said and we told ourselves, and we thought we were doing it. But it's really hard to do that with work for hire stuff because that just tends to take precedence.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
There's deadlines attached to that. Although I would like to think we were 50-50, it was really more work for hire stuff.
Yeah.
Which worked out at the time. It was fine. We did some really cool things. Some of the games that I'm most proud of were from that time of web games. We did one for Warner Brothers with Daffy Duck and Marvin the Martian called Robot Rampage.
Oh, that's so cool.
And it was basically just a small arena, and you have a bunch of robots surrounding you and trying to get you, and you just got to shoot them and kill them all dead. And then you have like interesting, goofy, like Looney Tunes style weapons that you could employ or get power ups. And then they liked that enough where they wanted to do a sequel. And that turned into probably my favorite game that I've had a hand in developing. And it was Robot Rampage 2. It was the same thing, except the arenas were bigger. There were multiple worlds, and it was a little bit more like it's kind of like a Diablo Light with Looney Tunes, Marvin the Martian and Daffy Duck as the characters.
Right, right.
And we had like a vending machine that you could go to upgrade your weapons, and you had like the special ability belts. And, I think it was at the stage where we had enough revenue coming in where we probably overdeveloped that thing. And Warner Brothers got way more than they paid for. So that was kind of a mistake.
Yeah.
But I also am very proud of that game. The unfortunate thing about web games is they don't have a super long lifespan.
Yeah.
And so it kind of died after a couple of years. And annoyingly, I guess this is kind of a side note, but the big studios in Hollywood, they're like a revolving door with their personnel.
Yeah.
It's like somebody enters a position there a year or two later, they're off at another studio. And it just seems to be how it works. They're constantly restructuring. And so our relationship with Warner Brothers was damaged by that because all of the people that I had a relationship with there ended up like just scattering off other places.
Yeah.
Or like getting laid off or,
Yeah.
whatever the case. And Robot Rampage 2 kind of suffered a similar fate in that
Sure.
they didn't really push it as much as they originally intended to. And so it was just kind of like this little hidden gem that some people really loved, but not a lot of people found.
Yeah. So when you're making these licensed games, do they come to you with a design document? Do they just come with you with the concept? Or do they say, hey, here's our IP. What do you want to do with it? Like, what's the level of involvement they have in the design process?
They usually come with the seed of an idea, and then we can run with it. And it was really nice. I think we established trust with the Warner Brothers and Disney clients pretty early on. And so it was really nice that they felt comfortable with giving us kind of a core idea, and then we could run with it, and they trusted us with that. I think that's kind of rare, at least given recent proposals and requests for proposals that I've received.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like, in my mind, these years were the highlight of working with the big studios. And part of it was because this Unity plugin was kind of experimental. And so these producers that we were working with were kind of given license to, I don't know, played a little loose with the rules.
Yeah.
And so we had a lot of freedom, and that was really nice. So I think this resulted in some of our stronger games just because we were able to really make the game we wanted to make.
Right.
It is really interesting working with clients because they obviously have like character specs and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so, we have to model like Marvin the Martian and then send it off for approval. And that was actually surprisingly, I don't want to say easy, but there weren't as many, they weren't as nitpicky as I expected. I think some of the weird things working with clients is they have very arbitrary rules when dealing with children playing games because, the audience is children.
Yeah.
So we want to be respectful and obviously not like fill young minds with stupid ideas. Like, for example, explosions are okay, but for some reason, fire, like setting characters on fire versus exploding them, that's okay, but just no fire.
Right. Because kids have access to matches, but not dynamite.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know.
One of the first Disney games we did is called Suga Mountain Super Race. It was a downhill racer. You're in like this little tricycle luge thing, and you're going down the road at insane speeds, like unsafe by any measure.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, this is cool. but I don't like the fireball. You need to change that. I'm like, okay, whatever. So we got rid of the fireball.
Yeah.
And then at the very end of that development cycle, they're like, these insane speeds are cool. You're going off jumps. That's cool. But we need seatbelts. And I'm like, okay, but you're looking at the backside of the character as you're going down the hill. They're like, I don't know, you still need seatbelts. Oh, and you need a helmet. And I'm like, wait a minute, these characters are defined by their hairstyles.
Yeah.
And so we were able to fight the helmet thing, but I guess we pasted on seatbelts and nobody ever saw them. But they're there.
Yeah. So at this point, is it still the two of you?
We ended up contracting some folks, and they helped us with Robot Rampage and the Disney games. So we had about 4 people making these games with Disney and whatnot. And then we had the desire to grow. And at the same time, we released, at about this time period, we released a game called 10 Balls, 7 Cups.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And this was our skee ball club.
Martha, stop giggling.
This was also
I just remember the story, so it's very funny.
This is also about the same time as that unfortunate meme involving 2 girls and 1 cup.
Oh. And it wasn't a reference to that?
The officially no. Of course not.
Don't Google that.
Okay, so the brief story here is like, okay, we wanted to make a little independent game.
Sure.
Great. Let's do something concise, small. The iPhone just got released like a year ago. And it's like, this is picking up steam. We're like, let's do something for the iPhone. And so looking around, and the skee ball was a great opportunity. You could swipe your finger. It worked well for a touch screen. Threw a ball, goes in the skee ball machine. Easy to make.
Yeah.
So we did it. But by the time we ended, it was like 3 or 4 months. There was already like 4 skee ball clones out there. And all of the obvious names were taken. Like, I forget the obvious names, but there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah.
And we learned a lot about trademark law because we can't use skee ball.
Yeah.
And we can't do anything phonetically similar or confusingly similar. So even like SKI ball is not a thing you can do.
Right.
So it's like, crap. Well, now what do we do? Like all the obvious names have taken. We can't do this license name. So obviously 10 balls, 7 cups.
You had no choice.
I had no choice.
Yeah. You're only
It just happened to coincide with this unfortunate meme that was going around at the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so where I'm going with this is Freeverse saw 10 balls, 7 cups, and they're like, hey, we've been talking about to the skee ball guys, the license holder, and we want to license 10 balls, 7 cups and make it officially branded skee ball. And we're like, well, yeah.
Because then you don't have to use that name anymore.
Right. And so this resulted in probably the biggest success of my career, and really, by any measure, a lot of money for a small studio, because it hit the #1 top selling chart for it was like 5 consecutive months.
Wow.
It was it was maybe one of the longest periods of time a game has been up in the top paid charts, especially nowadays when it's like you get 2 days, you're like the luckiest person in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, it was the early days of the App Store. So if it was nowadays and we were in the top charts for that long, like we'd be doing this interview in Bora Bora.
Yeah.
But it was still a significant amount of revenue. And so now we have money coming in daily combined with the work for hire stuff. And we're like, okay, let's get bigger. Let's make this realer. So that's when we started hiring, because in order to do everything we wanted to, maintain that mix of 50-50, we really just needed more people. Our first hire was an artist, which, like I said, I'm an artist with air quotes. And so that was really our first missing gap. I should specify that my business partner, by any measure, was like a creative genius when it came to coding and like artistic coding. It's a quality that's really hard to find in people. It's like you could code something to get things to work, but he was able to code things to get things to work in a fancy way, and in a way that felt nice.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So we kind of had that end of things covered. I kind of filled in the gaps a bit. Like I've always been kind of a jack of all trades, but master in none. But our real need was for an artist. So first hire. That hire worked out super well. We identified a gap. We filled it. It was a guy who was fairly fresh in the industry. And so we were in a position, we had the resources to hire somebody who we could like help form their skill sets, versus somebody who came in already like super established.
Yeah.
So that worked out really well and allowed us to crank out higher quality games. Like a couple of the Disney ones ended up being really, really nice and polished looking because of that extra art. Just made a whole world of difference. But then I think, and this is one of the lessons that I've learned here, is we wanted to keep getting bigger. We had the money to do it. But it was kind of one of those scenarios where I think I got caught up in the prestige of getting bigger, of hiring more people, rather than really asking the hard the question about like, what do we need to do to effectively grow? I was just like excited to just like, okay, we need more artists. We need, I didn't think hard enough about just how we wanted to grow this team. And well, that might not be fair. Maybe I did think hard about it. But I just didn't really have the experience to know how we should grow the team.
Sure.
So this is the period where we kind of started growing, but it was a little aimless. And it wasn't a problem at the time because we had a really nice, cushy revenue coming in from Skee-Ball.
Right. But you weren't expecting it, so you weren't planning to be this big at this time.
Right. And so we grew, and every single hire that we made and every person that I worked with, like I've really enjoyed working with them. But I think I kind of made some wrong hires because I think everybody that I hired was, with the exception of one guy, was more or less kind of a rookie. They didn't have a ton of experience. And I think this is because that's how I entered the industry. Like I came in not knowing what the heck I was doing and just kind of figured like, that's how everybody can do it. Here, come to Gravelle and work with me on figuring this shit out and making cool stuff.
Yeah.
And so it ended up being really good in some ways, but I think the downfall was that we didn't have enough experience collectively to really guide the ship effectively.
Okay.
And I think we didn't fail enough yet to know what to look out for.
Sure.
I like that you brought that up. You didn't fail enough.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the result is we kind of had this time period where the Skee-Ball revenue was coming in. We were doing work for hire stuff. The work for hire stuff was probably like, we were probably over delivering, honestly, our projects given the budgets.
Yeah.
Everything was financially fine, but the long run, we didn't really have a clear goal. I mean, the goal was we need to follow up Skee-Ball with something of our own. Like we can't depend on Skee-Ball forever, even though it kind of felt like it, which was honestly part of the problem. It's like the Skee-Ball money just kept coming in and we're like, well, this is never going to end. And that was an unfortunate mindset to have. And so we kind of floundered a bit, like finding our next game.
Okay.
And one of the games that resulted in that, actually one of my favorite games ever, but there were one or two titles we ended up not releasing for various reasons. And then when we did release one, it was called Jump Dudes, and there were high expectations here. And it is a game that I'm very proud of. Like it's a fun, polished game. I think the core idea is unique. It was kind of like it was a game where coins fell from the sky, and you were this little dude, this little cartoon character that jumped to collect the coins. But if you missed a coin, it hit the ground and the ground started shattering.
Oh.
And if the coins, if like a chunk of ground got hit by like 3 coins, it disappeared. And so now you have less to land on. And if you fall in the gap, you die. So I thought it was kind of a unique concept, but similar to things like Doodle Jump, which was just kind of like a modification of the platformer. I think part of the difficulty with Jump Dudes was that it was a long development cycle because client work tended to take priority, even though in hindsight, that was probably a bad thing to do because it meant that it was getting in the way of coming up with that next title that made us significant amounts of money versus just enough to squeak by, which is what contract work is. And so because contract work, which was in theory supposed to be 50% of our revenue stream, was really more like 80% of our time commitment. And so the Jump Dudes life cycle was really long. And because of that, like the App Store changed a lot between the beginning and the end of Jump Dudes. And the biggest change is that freemium started becoming this hip new thing that everybody wanted to do.
Okay.
So when we started Jump Dudes, it was like, well, yeah, 99 cents, sure. But by the end of Jump Dudes, it's like, well, aren't you going to have freemium hooks and blah, blah, blah. And so part of the difficulty with Jump Dudes was, we wanted to jump on this freemium bandwagon because like all the cool kids were doing it. And apparently you could make a ton of money doing it, right? And so it was our first entrance into the freemium model. And the result was one of my favorite games that we made. And we made like $5,000. And if I were to, like, I don't want to think about how much time, like person hours it took to make this game, but it was more than $5,000 by an order of magnitude or more. So that one really hurt. Like we had high hopes. We all really loved the game and we're like, this is going to be another stream of revenue. And it just wasn't. Somewhat funny story in a very sad way is I remember like the day or two after Jump Dudes was released, I looked at Flurry, which was what we were using for analytics at the time. And there was like this huge spike in users with like a ton of purchases. And I'm like, oh man, I'm going to be swimming in canoes of money. And when I looked at the App Store reports, it's like, no, you're not. And I found it was hackers, like Chinese hackers. I could see regionally where it was coming from. And it was all China. A ton of people downloaded the game and just like bought in-app purchases. They hacked it. And so like, we had a moment of, yeah, we made it. And then like a day later, we're like, no, we didn't.
Oh, wow.
I don't think though that it took away money. I just I think people got the game that wouldn't otherwise have gotten it.
Okay.
So I don't feel like it was a loss. It was more just like a giant like Monty Python foot coming down to crush our spirits.
Right.
Yeah, it was an emotional loss.
That makes sense.
So what happened with like skee ball and stuff to make it so that you weren't able to, what happened after that?
Yeah, what finally stopped that gravy train?
Yeah. So let me answer that along with a few other things that kind of surrounded us in this time period. So I think like this, like right around Jump Dudes or maybe a little bit before the release, I feel like it was kind of when we hit our peak in terms of like revenue and ability and people on hand to make cool stuff. We had a couple other projects that never really quite made it off the ground that I was sad about. We did a couple other like pseudo independent games. Like there was another game in there called Carnival Games, Flick Carnival Games, also published by Freeverse. And it was intended to kind of capture the same spirit as skee ball by the same publisher in the store. So we thought that it was kind of an easier slam dunk than just another fresh game. And even that didn't work out that well. It's like just because people downloaded skee ball doesn't mean they have interest in this other game that's kind of skee ball. Like just that brand just made all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
And so there was not only Jump Dudes, but Carnival Games was like failure, I guess you could say, financially anyway. Along the same time period, this is where some of the personal things surrounding my business partner kind of came to a head and really just made life a lot more complicated, and it just dictated that we ended up separating as business partners. But it wasn't contentious. It was really a lesson in sometimes circumstances outside of game development get in the way. And so it's kind of like a double whammy. Like some of these commercial failures combined with like the inability to like work as a partnership. So it's just kind of like this convergence of like kind of failures and ill-timed things that started making life more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And then the icing on this poop cake is what happened with Skee Ball.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Skee Ball was published by Freeverse. Freeverse, at about the end of Skee Ball 1's life cycle, and at about the beginning of Skee Ball 2's life cycle, got purchased by a publisher called Mobage.
Oh.
And they were one of the first like freemium, like woo, all in on freemium studios.
Yeah.
So that informed that Skee Ball 2 would be a freemium game. So it would be free, and then you have in-app purchases.
Mhm.
And that ended up making the development life cycle for that more difficult, because freemium is just hard.
Mhm.
Like, if you think it's hard, reassess and think it's harder. Like doing an effective freemium game is just hard.
Mhm.
And so Skee Ball 2 took a really long time. It also didn't help that my business partner wasn't able to contribute much at that time. That made the development cycle slower. And so Skee Ball 2 was released. It downloaded in high enough quantities that it was financially successful,
Okay.
but it didn't match Skee Ball 1 because an effective revenue stream from a freemium game is just hard. And then I'm getting to that icing part here. Then Mobage got purchased by DNA,
Oh.
and DNA no longer had any interest in Skee Ball.
Mm-hmm.
It was just total small potatoes to them. To us, it was like the blood coursing through our veins.
Right.
Yeah.
This is what was supporting our studio, and we haven't had that follow-up game yet. We don't have that second stream of revenue. And now DNA has no interest in maintaining this license. And so they essentially just kind of let it lapse.
Oh no.
And I tried the hardest I could to just get it myself, or like get them to care, whatever, but it just didn't work out. And so we lost like pretty abruptly the Skee Ball license.
Mhm.
And so that was a significant stream of revenue that was just like, whoop, gone.
Mm.
And so that was a big ouch. And we had some reserves. We had planned, we had at around this time Jump Juice was released. So we had hopes that would do something for us, and just nothing worked out. And it ended up being a very difficult time. Long story short, one of the hardest things I've ever had to do was lay off 3 of the people on our team. I remember that was rough.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed working with everybody that I worked with. And so it was strictly layoffs. It wasn't like, oh, you're not cutting it. So that was, you just got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
And that's what we had to do, because we weren't, the contract work wasn't cutting it.
Mm-hmm.
So here you are at your like lowest point. How do you get out of that?
Well, it's a lot easier with fewer people.
Yeah.
But really, I think what we've gone through so far has been, it's like the Wild Thing roller coaster at Valley Fair. Like, there's this large peak and then this large downfall, whatever. And then the rest from there is kind of like little ups and downs and ups and downs. And so I think that kind of defines the next period of Gravelle, where we had essentially 3 of us at this point, and we kind of reassessed and we're like, okay, what do we got to do here? And we ended up focusing on the steady stream of revenue, like the more safe stuff, and that is contract work, because we still had a pretty good relationship with Disney. Well, the Warner Brothers one at this time had kind of fizzled because everybody that I knew there was no longer at Warner Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sustained us for a little bit. Unfortunately, throughout this period of time, Disney, a lot of their stuff was in-house built.
Yeah.
Or they started shifting to overseas studios,
Mm-hmm.
which we just can't complete with prices in the Philippines or China.
Yeah.
It's just something we can't do. Fast forwarding a bit, the last proposal I got from Disney was like almost a laughable insult. They're like, here, make a tower defense game that's like really polished and great and a lot of depth. Here's $50,000 to do it. And I'm like, the only way this is possible is if I'm not paying wages here, and if I already have a game that I just reskin.
Yeah.
And like, that's the only way I could have, like, in good faith, given them a proposal. And so I actually asked my producer, who one of the few people that stayed at a big studio for like more than 2 years. Like I had a good relationship with this guy, and I'm like, okay, just be real with me. Is this request for proposal really just meant for like a reskin or offshore studio or something? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, well, I can't work with that. So So unfortunately, the Disney relationship kind of fizzled. So then after that, I guess it just been kind of, we went down to 2 people. It wasn't a layoff. It was just the other guy was ready to move on somewhere else. And so then it was 2 of us. We have a really good partnership going on here. So we just kind of weathered the storm and found weird odds and ends to work on. Unfortunately, just like at this point, a lot of our early success was just like recognition because we were Unity experts. We were one of the first adopters of Unity. We had a lot of work with big studios. And so it was easy to find people who wanted significant work. But at this point, like everything's so crowded, like it's hard to release a game and get recognition. Everybody's using Unity. We were able to keep up, but everybody else is kind of at the same spot. So we just ended up taking like weird projects. For example, we did some medical training, and I distinctly remember working on optimizing large texture sheets of rashes.
Fun.
Many of these rashes were in very unfortunate places.
Extra fun.
There's some cool stuff though. Strata, which is one of my favorite projects, that was actually probably what kept us afloat to some degree for a while. Strata is a pretty simple puzzle game. It's kind of like, I like to describe it like Sudoku, except with colors and layering colors instead of numbers.
It's very fun.
Thank you. And that was kind of a neat experiment. And it's like, all right, well, we got Unity. We can export to all these different platforms. Let's just do it and see what happens. And so we ended up going on like weird, obscure platforms and popular ones. Like it was on iOS. It got recognition from Apple, which was a huge help. The nice thing is I had a couple like loose contacts at Apple that I would meet with like either by email or in person at conferences every now and then. And so I was able to get their attention through the contacts there, and they're like, oh, this is neat. And then they ended up featuring it, which ended up being significant. Android also saw like a feature, but then we had weird platforms. Like the first platform that Strata was released on was the Nook.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
This was almost because there was like, this was another emerging platform, emerging in air quotes. And they were offering like a bunch of visibility on their store for free. They were just desperate for content.
Yeah.
And so we're like, yeah, why not? It'll be like a soft launch. And it worked out okay. It's kind of ridiculous in hindsight because I'm like the Nook.
You're sitting across from someone who released a game on the BlackBerry Playbook, so
we came real close to that one too. The BlackBerry folks were like basically throwing devices at us. Like, get it on here, get it on here. That decision was made for us though because I think they went bankrupt or something like before we really could decide. The week that we released Strata on the Nook was the same week that the Nook store closed.
Wow.
Or like, I don't know, opened themselves up to the Google Play Store or something. So it was almost like, whoops.
Yeah.
We released on Amazon. Totally wasn't worth it. Totally wasn't worth it on Nook. Google Chrome Store, don't do that either. I mean, I'm telling you things that are kind of obvious, but we're like, whatever.
In hindsight's always 2020.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more appealing to a developer on the last third of their project than like being the first in a new marketplace. Because, you experienced it with the App Store, and with web games. Like if you're there early, it can really help you get through the thing. So no one's can be blamed for like trying to get it onto that weird thing they know is not going to work.
Yeah.
I've actually grown a bit cynical about new platforms like that because
Sure.
Like you said, some of our early success was because we were getting on this new exciting platform. And so then that kind of set a precedent that every time a new platform was like flashed in front of me, I'm like, ooh. And then I chase it, and then it's like, oh, that didn't work at all.
So you're not excited about this Playdate handheld then?
No.
Just announced no?
I mean, yeah, I think my word of caution to everybody is just like, just do it if it's easy.
Yeah.
But don't underestimate the small amount of work that adds up every time you release on a new platform. It's
Yeah.
like death by a thousand cuts.
Mm-hmm.
There's promotional imagery, there's updates, there's weird bugs. Like every platform you add adds a whole new headache, and it's actually quite annoying. So the Strata experiment on just kind of like scattergun approach was a fun experiment, and we learned from it. We're not going to do it again. I think Apple iOS Store, Google Play Store, Steam ended up being okay, and that's just kind of it.
Yeah. So speaking of Strata was designed in-house, right? It wasn't a client project. And that starts a new sort of precedent for Gravelle as a studio that makes like these types of games, right?
Yeah. So the beautiful thing about Strata was that it was basically our reaction to having Jump Dudes, which was this big freemium experience. And we also did a freemium experience with Disney that didn't work out very well. Mm-hmm. And it just makes the game so complicated. So we're just like, let's do something simple, contained, premium, done. Mm-hmm. And so kind of relearning that lesson way back, like just keep it simple. Don't try to go crazy with feature creep. And that worked out really well. So that was kind of a breath of fresh air, something minimal, something that focused on design. It was really fun to work on. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, it kind of started a new era where it's like, okay, let's keep it simple. Let's keep it premium. Cool with that.
Mm-hmm. And you released Optica, the sort of spiritual successor, just last year, right?
Yes. So we're working with Glitch as the publisher. And now we released Optica, and it's a very similar game in a lot of ways.
Also very fun.
Thank you.
It's my favorite mobile game in a long, long time. Like
you 100%ed it, didn't you? I think I just did. I did too. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just nuked your
I know
saved game.
Dear listeners, Matt gave me a beta build with new levels, and it wiped my save file.
Oh no!
So now I have to do them all over again, and I couldn't be happier.
We didn't put this in Optica, but any listeners who have Strata, there is a cheat code.
Ooh.
Should I say it?
You sure?
Yeah.
Right. It's the Konami up, down, left, right. So if you do that in using swipe motions on the screen in Strata, you will unlock all the levels.
Oh, nice.
BRB unlocking levels.
I didn't do that for Optica. Maybe that's in an update.
So, you've got these original projects now that you're working on, but you're still doing client work. You're working with VR now as well, right?
Yep. So I think to answer Martha's question on how to get out of that, the slump, it's been a real long game working in VR and trying to get the attention of more serious applications, corporate applications, because VR just isn't at a point where I'm not going to be able to release a game and make money from consumers. It's just not enough. I mean, that's not necessarily true. It's just hard. It's going to be really hard.
Right. Yeah.
Right. You hear about the sort of breakout VR experiences, and there are very few of them, and a lot of them are funded by publishers or platform holders to push the platform. It's still not quite sustainable, I think, for smaller studios. Not fully. Some have made it, but it's like harder than other platforms, I think.
Right.
But I'm really excited about VR because I understand that it's in early stages. It's got a ways to go, but I think it is going to be a significant part of our future, especially when VR and AR kind of merge into one thing and a more compact size.
Yeah.
And so kind of playing the long game, we've been trying to get interest from corporate entities. We've enlisted the help and essentially added a third partner to the mix who does business development. Like that's his focus. That's one of the key pieces that I was missing in the past is somebody who was really there to focus on developing the business and client relations and finding new clients.
Yeah.
And so we're learning from past mistakes. We have this guy working with us, and he's found some really cool clients to work with in the medical space.
Oh,
So utilizing virtual reality to do things from like physical therapy to cognitive training. And I can't really get into specifics, but it's really interesting stuff. And it's science-based, and science holds a special place in my heart. So I really, really enjoy working with some of these companies who are like legit scientific testing these concepts.
Yeah.
And they actually, it's a completely different mindset and culture than strictly gaming industry, because they move at a much slower pace and they actually pay a reasonable wage. And so it's been like a 2-year journey in trying to drum up these clients, and it's finally starting to pay off.
Yeah.
So that's where we're kind of at right now.
Well, it's interesting. Like this what you've described is the different eras of Gravik, but that goal of 50-50, whether that's really 50-50 or not, like you still have that. But now your 50% client work is now focused on this other interesting thing, and it's not making games you're not as excited about. And then you got all your game energy to focus on the other 50%, right? Like, do you find that really exciting, or does it mean you just have to learn more about more things and keep more things in your head?
Well, I guess I'll say that 50-50 is no longer a goal.
Okay.
I think it's just so hard as an independent studio to get any sort of traction as an independently released game. And so that's more in our minds as just kind of a side fun thing.
Sure.
Like we just kind of fit that in where we want now. So our main focus at this current time,
it doesn't
is client
burden
work.
you or anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like when we get a chance, let's make some cool stuff. But we're keeping it a little bit more laser focused. Otherwise, I think we're going to spread ourselves too thin, which is what we did in the past.
Yeah. Cool.
That makes sense.
So, like, I think really want to know just the big lessons. Like, what are the takeaways? Right? Like you did promise us some takeaways.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry.
The word sage advice was thrown around.
Yeah, sage advice.
No pressure. Sorry.
Oh man. As much as I loved working with everybody at our heights of number of people and resources, I think I would have hired a different team. It's not because of lack of skill. Like everybody that I worked with was amazing. But I think we needed somebody to be more of a leader, or I needed to provide that role, because I was doing this weird thing where I was developing and managing the team. And it's just like my brain has the hardest time context switching. It ended up being inefficient. And I think I had unrealistic expectations of myself. And so instead of doing something 100%, I was doing two things, probably ended up being 40%.
Oh, okay. Sure.
And so there wasn't really like a clear there wasn't somebody like really clearly steering the ship. And by that, I mean like nobody was like, here's a design, let's run with it. Let's like do this design. It was just kind of more of a collaborative process where it's like everybody kind of contributed. And in theory, like I really wanted that to work. I wanted it to be a collaborative effort, which works, right? But I really learned that somebody needs to be there to like be the vision holder, to be the person that really drives the game and the direction. And I think that's one key piece we were missing. And I could have filled that role, but then I would have needed somebody. You know what? I don't think I could have filled that role, because I think the other lesson I learned is what my strengths are and what they aren't. And I'm not a good game designer. And I think I'm really good at taking somebody's idea and making it look good and feel good, but I am not the person to be like, this is my vision.
Yeah. Was that a hard lesson to learn? Because you don't seem that down about it.
Well, the only time I get down about lessons that I've learned is if I don't learn from them. So I'm not that down about it, but I think it's important to be critical of oneself.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm fine with it. Like if I'm not good at designing, like whatever.
Right.
Next time I make sure I have somebody that is.
Yeah.
I think to go along with just kind of how I'd build the team differently is I filled the team with a lot of inexperienced people in the hopes that we could mold their talent to where we needed it.
Right. You didn't want to bring someone in. You wanted someone who could like belong to that place.
Right.
Right. And like grow together.
But I think that was just, in some ways kind of a naive, idealistic way to think about it, because really what I needed is somebody with experience and like somebody to maybe even be like, keep me in check and tell me what to do.
Right.
Because I just didn't have the experience. And in a lot of ways, I still don't. Like, if I were to be in that circumstance again, I don't know if I could make the decisions to make it successful. I think my hire would be to get somebody on board that can help me ensure that it's successful,
Right.
which means somebody with experience, somebody who knows how to like grow a team effectively, somebody who has a vision and can help me define that vision and execute it. I guess that's kind of the downside of being a jack of all trades, master of none, is that you want to do everything, but you really just shouldn't. I think if I can ramble a little bit more to directly answer your question, Mark, another hard lesson, and this one I think is the biggest gut punch of them all. You know, I think it's natural as you get older, you get a little cynical, right? But if you know me, I think sometimes I'm still kind of a naive idealist sometimes. And I really, really want to believe that if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. But when you're dealing with a limited number of resources, you can't. And so I think there were points in time where I was trying to steer team members and myself to do things that I just shouldn't have had them doing. Because like, sure, like maybe eventually they could have learned these skills or been good at this thing. But we're dealing with a limited amount of time and resources, and to try to fit people into a mold that they're not meant to fit into has just been a hard lesson. And it's actually a lesson that was foreshadowed a little bit by somebody that I would meet up with who worked at Unity. He was a Danish guy. And this was early on, like when skee-ball first started becoming a big thing. He was like, you know, maybe he saw this in our team. Maybe he saw this in me. But he's like, you know, Americans and Europeans have a very different mindset of looking at things. He said that Americans have this mindset that if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. And we don't have that. We know our limits here. And I'm just like internally rolling my eyes at this guy. I'm like, such a downer, man. But I think he was kind of right. Yeah. At least in the context of business and like, you know, as much as you really want that to be true, don't count on it.
Right. Sure. Yeah, like you can do anything if you put your mind to it, if it's possible.
Yeah.
It's a caveat, right? Well, Matt, thank you for joining us and sharing that sage advice as well as the story. I think it'll really help a lot of people who are starting their journey as a game developer, either as an independent thing, they're going to start a business, or someone maybe who's a little bit along that way and doesn't know what to do right now, or someone who's just had some success and is thinking it's going to last forever. You know? Yeah.
The biggest takeaway. I'm sorry. If you find yourself in a position where you have success and you have money coming in, make sure to take some of that money and put it in retirement. Buy a house, do something.
Yeah. People can find both Strata and Optica on the various app stores, including not the Nook anymore.
It might still be there somewhere in the depths of the internet.
Yeah.
That's our show. If you haven't already, subscribe to Nice Games Club in your favorite podcast app and be sure to give it a good review if you liked it or are nice like us. We really do need to know you're out there, so leave a review and tell all your friends too. Matt, will you leave a review and tell all your friends too?
I'll leave a review and tell at least some of my friends.
All right. I'll accept that. We also want to hear directly from you, so follow us on Twitter and all the other things at Nice Games Club and email us at contact@nicegames.club. Lastly, you can find out more about the show and your nice host and nice guest, as well as get all of the links and show notes from this and other episodes at nicegames.club.
So until we start again, remember to
play nice
and make nice.
It'll come to me. Give me a second. We got noticed by a publisher called, God damn it. I had it and I lost it. Okay. We got notice from a publisher called
Is the publisher called
Shockwave.
Shockwave,
Okay.
Shockwave.
I just say it once. Okay. We got notice from a publisher called Shockwave.